Hello, my name is Lady Tequila from the Coven of the Open Mind, and you are watching Wicca and Witchcraft 101. Hail and welcome. This week we are talking about witchcraft, finally, the basics of the actual practice of magic. This will be a pretty high level overview. We will talk about evocation and invocation, once again, what the difference is in a bit more detail, and add to that picture. We'll do an introduction to shielding. So after this lecture, you should be practicing shielding and working on your ability to extend your energy outside of yourself. And that's the basis of spell work. And we will talk about communion and how that differs from invocation. We'll talk about the elements in like a witchcraft capacity. What are the elements? What are their associations? What do they mean? What do they represent? How do we use them? We'll talk about the summoning pentagrams, the polarity, once again, this time in regard to witchcraft practice as opposed to Wiccan belief, like how we've talked about it in the past. Duality plays a role in witchcraft as well, so we'll see that here. And then we'll talk about casting circle, which is like the ultimately Wiccan, witchy way to shield yourself. So that will be our last topic for this lecture, and then you'll have everything you need to start working on spells and gathering supplies for spells and thinking about spell work and casting circle and practicing shielding, and that will facilitate a dedication ceremony of some kind for any of you who are following along with us live. So hopefully if you are following along with us live, you've joined our community already, the Open Minded Crossroads. It's a Discord server. The link to join is on our website, and if you do come on there and you want to dedicate with us, you're welcome to do that at our next full moon ceremony, the second full moon of Beltane, which is an especially magical moon. It's in Scorpio if you look at where the planets actually are, and it just has a great energy for dedications and rededications, any sort of initiation. This is a good full moon for that. So if you're doing your own ceremony, still consider doing it on the coming full moon for yourself. Okay, let's get started with this lecture. Okay, so to revisit this subject from back probably the first lecture where we talked about the overview of everything, you have invocation versus evocation. This is a dichotomy because you're either sending energy out or bringing energy in, and you can only really do one of those things at a time. You can bring energy down into your space and then put your energy woven out through that, weave that out into the universe, and in that way bring energy down to send it out. But you're only ever bringing it down or sending it out. It's either ebb and flow, one or the other, back and forth, right? So that's the idea between invocation and evocation as well. It's an oscillation. So when we say invocation, we mean energy in, self-transformation, ritual, right? When we say evocation, we mean energy out, transformation of the external physical world, and therefore spell work. The thing that these both invocation and evocation have in common, psionics, they are both transformative, either of the self or of the outside world, and they both require a shield, but for different reasons. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Remember that ritual is like a cocoon. So you form the hard circle around you, a hard shield to protect you. You can't even see the things that are outside the circle or realize that they're there. You're in this hard shield. You're only aware of this current moment, which is somewhere in the world between worlds, outside of time, and that's all you're aware of. And in that headspace, you are at your most powerful. You're unable to be interfered with by external sources, so you're able to just be your best self, and be yourself the most. And so in order to do spell work, which is an expression of the self, that's very important. But also in order to transform yourself, you need to not be distracted or be influenced by things that might actually harm you or change you in a way that is not desirable. So when you're doing invocation, the cocoon is around you to keep your you protected from things that are outside of you, and you bring only the right kind of energy in and allow that to transform you. And then when the ritual is done, you break out of the cocoon and you are transformed in some way. With spell work, you are weaving the space around you so that you can generate the energy from yourself, and it builds up until eventually it explodes out into the universe in a large burst, which is more powerful, more potent, right? That's what it's said to be, to do it in a burst. So you still need a shield to do evocation, to store the energy so that you don't get exhausted trickling the energy away. And we'll talk more about when you might want to use a shield. But first, let's talk a bit about what shielding is. Okay, so shielding is when you push your energy out from yourself into the world around you in order to clear it of whatever is there, whatever might distract you. It gives you space to just be in your own headspace, your own energy, so that you can find focus and peace, right? So a shield can keep your energy in. It can also keep unwanted energy out, and it can be used in a less permanent way. You can be used as like a hard shield, a circle, to cast in ritual because you don't want to notice anything outside of the ritual. You're purely focused on what you're doing, and you don't want anything to come in that might corrupt your intentions or mess with you in some way, because everything is deliberate. In a ritual, everything is ordered. That's the point, right? So you have to keep the disorder out and keep a perfectly ordered space within. So that's like that's not really a permanent shield. That's just something you put up, you cast it out, you do your right, and then it comes down. If you want it to be more permanent, you want it to be something that attaches to the walls of your house and keeps you safe all the time. So that's called a ward. And that is something that needs to be powered by something. So many people will cast the intention and desire into the walls. They'll cast the circle, and then they'll imagine themselves fueling it from a crystal or something. And then the crystal needs periodic recharging. That's why people will leave it out in the moonlight, or bring it into ritual with them and charge it with intent themselves. And crystals are thought to just hold the memories. They're thought to they have an emanation of energy of their own that is unique to their crystalline structure. So it's just something that serves as a focal point. And again, it's just a tool. So we talk more about tools coming up. But with all tools, it's really you that's doing the magic. It's you that's powering that ward. But by tying it to a physical object that you associate with shielding, it makes it easier to generate that energy. If you get very exhausted, your wards will probably weaken, even if they are tied to crystals and physical objects. And an exception to that may be if they're tied to sigils. But so, it's shielding is not something you do once and done. You don't shield your home, you don't ward your home, and then you never ward it again. You have to charge the crystals, you have to recast the shield, you have to be constantly working for the purposes of protection in order to really be protected. Okay, so now keep in mind that shielding should be mastered first and foremost. First of all, this is the key technique that will allow you to do effective spell work without exhausting yourself. It will allow you to work with deity without risk of invoking something that you shouldn't. When in doubt, shield it out. That's just something I made up. But, both invocation and evocation work can be dangerous. And keep in mind also that unless it's part of the rite, you should be well fed and well rested before you enter a ritual or spell or do any kind of magic. If you're more advanced, then sometimes fasting or sleep deprivation can be a part of the ritual. But if you're learning how to do magic from this video series, then you're probably not there yet, I would imagine. So just, take care of yourself, take care of your body, take care of your needs, right? That's important. Don't eat too much, don't eat too little. Everything just the right amount. Take care of yourself. That's the idea. That means both indulgence and discipline to some extent, right? Okay. So that's an introduction to shielding. We talked about using the chakras to cast a shield, pushing the energy out from yourself. In this one, we're going to talk about casting circle. That'll give you 2 different techniques to use to start practicing shielding. You should start practicing shielding. If you are following along with this and you're a beginner, now's the time. Start working on your shielding. There's very little risk to you from just working on pushing your energy outside yourself and then feeling it pop back in. So, go ahead and start working on that anytime. Now, communion. Let's talk about communion for a second. Communion is when you sense an energy and you identify what it is, but you don't bring it into yourself or allow it to affect you. It can affect you over time. We'll talk in a sec, but you're trying not to let it affect you. You're not letting it in. You're actively sensing it from afar. That's the idea. So it requires you to quiet the self. You experience non-thinking or mindfulness. So go look at some of the past lectures where we talk about the different kinds of meditation if you don't know what these kinds of meditation are. But yes, so non-thinking, mindfulness, reflective meditation can be used as well. Just thinking about an idea, a subject, a place, a memory, fixating on something in your mind's eye, fixating on something that has a specific message or power or meaning, and then that you can come to understand what that meaning is and have some relationship with that more abstractly and less directly, so it doesn't directly transform you in some way. And you do this to get to know the energy, to make sure that it is what you think it is, that it is certainly going to help you and not harm you, that you are sure you can work with it safely. You do this because you wouldn't want to invoke a demon but knowing the name of that demon can help you exorcise it. So you may want to commune with the energy without allowing it into yourself. So you commune through a shield. And the type of shield you would use can differ. So I think we talked about this in the past, but we will talk about it more when we get to the subject of evocation. But there's different kinds of shields. For now, just focus on a hard shield, like casting circle. You're in your own sacred space. You don't notice anything from the outside world. People don't interfere or interrupt you, even if you're in a public space, because they can tell you're busy and you're doing something, right? So that's the power of a well-cast circle. Just focus on that if you're a beginner. We're going to talk about the different kinds of shields and get really involved in shielding. So if you're not a beginner, stay tuned for the more advanced lectures that are coming. But people have a good understanding of communion. In Christianity, it's very common. Communion is something that kids will often do so that they can come to know Jesus Christ, or God focused into the archetype of goodness. That's who Jesus Christ is, right? It's an archetype of divinity. And so the kids will get to know this archetype through the communion process, which allows them to engage in spirituality with less risk for them invoking something that they think is deity that is actually not serving them or not beneficial to them. So that's an example of communion that's very common, that many people see. And it's just, people will use communion for all kinds of purposes. It's a really, really universal common skill. It's not that risky. Especially if you know how to shield or immediately withdraw from a space if the energy is not serving you. It can be risky even to commune with things over time. So I like to talk about the example from the Conjuring series, where even the woman who does the communion with the spirits and the demons to see if they need to be exorcised or whatever, over time she becomes affected and starts to have hallucinations and, symptoms of possession, even though she never invokes the demons. She's always kept them at a distance, but she's also not shielding. She's really relying on her beliefs to shield her. And you have to be purely righteous and to work with demons and to work with chaos and not have it in any way corrupt you, in your and introduce bias and delusion and these things. So she gets herself in trouble over time, even though she's just communing with the energy, different energies really. it starts to affect her. It starts to affect her. It starts to make her have the symptoms of demon possession. And from that, she would likely, over time, create her own demons from within her. And you can do that, and they can even take on an external form. But that's sort of like exposure to an energy, even from a distance, will still impact you a little bit. And without constant, like, cleanup inside of yourself to say, okay, what is going on here? This is attached to some event, to something I did. I'm just gonna deal with those feelings and kind of purge this and move on from this chapter of my life. And you have to be meditating often and being aware of yourself and practicing mindfulness in order to do any kind of spirituality in a way that is healthy, really. So that's why, people get themselves in trouble with communion too, but it is the least risky, and it's the one that if you're just communing with, like, the moon and nature and, wholesome, happy, healthy things that are wholly good, they will make you better every time, because they're good but in nature. So that is why Christians choose to commune with Jesus Christ and get their children to commune with that energy and teach them this is the energy of goodness, right? So whatever archetype you would like to, whatever face, whatever voice, whatever personality best suits you, find some representation of goodness and commune with that to start off with, especially if it's a force. This is why people start off working with deities that are more well known. Maybe they have friends that work with certain deities and they just work with them because it's, like, a little safer. And then in doing that, they stumble upon the ones they're meant to work with, right? So we'll talk about that whole journey in time. But communion is the best way to get started with invocation, and shielding is the best way to get started with evocation. And that's why we have spent so much time on each of these. Remember that if anything feels off and you don't feel like doing ritual, don't. Okay, it could even just be that the stars are in a position that is different or adversely impacting you in particular, and you're just not in the right headspace to do the ritual. Well, if anything feels off, don't do it. That's the idea, because if you do a ritual badly, you can exhaust yourself, you can corrupt yourself somehow, you can become attached to some energy that is not good for you, that you think is good for you, but it's really hurting you. Delusion, stuff like this. Ritual, spell work, it's trying. It is not something to take on lightly, especially if you're doing it on your own. If you're doing it with other more experienced people, then it's a little bit easier, but you still should make sure that you're well and that you're taking care of your body, and that you just are taking care of your chakral health, just keeping yourself aligned, getting into alignment before you go to the ritual, all that sort of stuff. Keep yourself safe and happy and make sure that everything you do serves you. That's the idea. Okay, the elements. So, the elements are a meta-science. They describe the way that processes in the universe can act. Okay, and they explain motivation, desire, the foundation of everything that actually exists. The elements themselves, we call them earth, air, fire, and water, but they are not really the earth, the air, the fire, and the water. They really are just forces that are found within each other, that are one on some higher level, right? So it goes along with all the metaphysics from all the past lectures. And that's why we don't need to talk about that anymore. We can just have fun. So the elements describe the nature in which things can act. When we associate an herb or crystal or tool with an element, we are describing the nature of that in a fundamental way that can be used to derive its purposes, right? So I wanted to just read an excerpt from my book. This is from chapter 4 on page 135. And it gives an overview of how the metaphor works. And then we'll talk a little bit about the star diagram. So earth and fire represent our physical embodiment. Earth being our body, and fire being the spark of life which animates physical form. So we know this flame is our vital organs, our nervous systems, the parts of us that are electrical in nature. And if we wanted to state it with a less emphasis on physics, we could say that these together are the part of our egos which arise from primal urges and the needs of our bodies. The part of our identity that is driven by physical existence. Our DNA, that which makes our form unique. Earth is our body itself, as well as our strength and will to survive, and the energy of the ground beneath our feet. Earth gives us the conditions needed for this body to remain alive, as well as embodying a woven tapestry within nature, a complex balance of ecosystems, of animals and plants with competing needs, which sustains all life. Fire, therefore, is the soul of this life. Fire represents the transformative and destructive side of life, the part of nature, the beings who can affect change in the otherwise static, natural background. Fire also represents attraction in the form of desire, lust, or willpower, the force required to produce more life, to value our own lives, and to continue the cycle of physical existence. Life begets life because of the nature of fire, the nature of the desire to be, which is woven into the fabric of our reality. Water is the side of us which is creative and receptive, empathic and emotional, healing and nurturing. It aligns with our subconscious self and the childlike wonder and love we are all capable of feeling. Any being said to have water as an element is capable of love, fear, dreaming, and any possible form of processing and internally relating to the observable world around them. Air, on the other hand, represents the forces within us which wish to exert change on the world around us, the opposite of receptivity and reactivity to what we passively experience. Air is an impulsiveness or restlessness which drives us to act, representing our conscious minds and our curiosity. So together, water and air comprise the rest of the ego, the sense of self which has feelings, opinions, and desires which are not tied to the nature of our physical experiences. Air is the reason why animals do things just for the thrill of it. Like how humans jump out of airplanes, dolphins flip for attention, and cats hunt for sport. Water is why emotions can exist contradictory to objective truth, like how larger animals are often scared of smaller ones, even when the smaller ones cannot harm them. Irrationality and perception, which exist independent of our physical form, is only possible because of the forces of air and water as they manifest through our bodies. This forms another unique layer to our conscious existence as embodied beings. So that is a good high-level overview. And I think that is so succinct that I wanted to just read it. So what are the elements? An intuitive understanding for the mysteries, metaphors, which are valued very highly, very prized by witches, because they resemble not just truths of the universe, but also ways to relate to those truths. And that serves a witch better, so that's better. Don't just tell me what it is. How do I relate to it? What does it mean? Not everyone has spiritual or intuitive intelligence automatically. So for some people, magic and visions and participating in reality in this way is a bit more challenging, and that's why the metaphor can be so useful. Now, when you see this diagram, this is the metaphor, right? So you have earth and fire at the bottom, and these together are the opposite of spirit. So you are physically embodied. You're in your physical vessel because you're not just a spirit. You have earth and fire. They bound you. They bind you to this physical reality where you experience physics. Then you have the next level, the air and the water. And the air and the water are the emotional, less, they're kind of opposites, right? Just like we said, they are the ebb and flow of rational and irrational thought. And they are the manifestation of the abstract into physical reality. And that is our consciousness, our awareness. And then when you have them all together, you have spirit. Now, these can also be seen as a metaphor for the fundamental forces of physics, which is really cool. So that's what I've given here, the force that goes with them. Earth is electricity and magnetism because it forms the physical ground. All physical objects, all planets, all trees, all of everything exists in the way it does because of EM. So it's literally the structure of the universe is EM. So that's Earth, right? It's structure. Air is mysticism, is defying the odds. Fire is generation of energy and spontaneity. And then you have water, which is attraction, right? So all the forces kind of line up that way. The qualities of each go along with the metaphor. So for earth, you have strength, stability, wealth and prosperity and abundance. For air, dreams, psychic abilities, songs of any kind, traveling, visualizations, experiences of all kinds, memories. For fire, you have energy, love, passion, vitality, health and endurance, desire, your will to act. And then for water, you have emotions and receptivity and imagination and dreaming and your nurturing and creative side. And that all comes from water. And then you can use all of this to keep track of what kinds of grains go where. So if you're like, okay, patchouli aligns with the earth. So that's why we use it for all of our abundance and money magic, because patchouli and earth, right? Earth means abundance. Cedar, okay, honeysuckle, magnolia, sage, honey, these all align with the earth. When you add these to your spell or your ritual, when you put honey as an offering, you are seeking strength and stability. You are seeking oneness with the complicated tapestry that's woven on top of the structure of life, right? So that is where this stuff comes from. Now, these all align with metals as well, and they all have crystals, and all the astrological signs line up, which we'll talk more about in a second, and they all align with a specific kind of fae. Fae, F-A-E, you'll see some people use fairies to mean fae, and they refer to all the fae as fairies. Fairies are a specific kind of fae. They are the stereotypical flying kind that have wings and zip around, Tinkerbell. Sylphs are more like cloud beings, but there's many different ways of imagining air as a being. You would call, if you watched Frozen 2, you would call Gale a sylph. A Gale is a sylph. Okay, so then there's dwarves or gnomes or golems. Okay, to stay with the Norse metaphor. Salamanders and snakes and dragons align with fire. And for water, undines, so any kind of sea creature, and mermaid. They chose a horse in Frozen 2, which I thought was a little bizarre. A seahorse, maybe? I don't know, it's a little weird. But it was exciting, and the music is good, so who cares? But that you can read all of these associations. The crystals are pretty obvious. Maybe ruby is one that's less obvious. You might think that ruby is fire, but it goes with earth. Some of the finer, more refined gemstones align with earth. Anything that resembles wealth or represents wealth or abundance. With air, you've got amethyst, right? So that makes sense. That's divination. Air is ruled by or divination as an art is ruled by air. Citrine, yellow jasper, and calcite, all the generating crystals, from that align with the tummy chakra, right? So that makes sense. For fire, you've got, the black and red jasper, smoky quartz, basalt, obsidian, things that ground you to this earth, but that also represent, changing, right? So like lava rocks represent a change to the earth, right? Like the pressure and the buildup, the desire to form new land, right? Like that's all of that is kind of like the fire component. And then you've got for water all of the pearls and aquamarines, all of the water rocks, but also some of the blue ones like blue tourmaline and sodalite and blue kyanite and things that go with communication and receptivity and stuff as well. So remember, it's not necessary to remember all of this information. You can jot it down, you can create elaborate diagrams and charts, and you can refer to it all the time if you want to. Or you could be more sensitive than that. You can learn how to just notice the undercurrents and the associations and spend time meditating on something and just taking it in and thinking, okay, how does this thing act in the world, right? How does it look? What color is it? Where does it grow? How does it grow? What are all of its physical properties? Because that will give you some indication of the energies that make it up, because a physical thing is something that is acting over time, right? So the forces that act wove together to form this physical thing. And if you want to know what those forces are, you just have to spend time with that thing and leave bias behind and just observe it. And you will come to understand it. As above, so below. As below, so above. That's why that works. Something's metaphysical properties just mirror its physical ones. That's why you have to take care of your body if you want to do good magic, because it's all you're one. It's integrated. Okay. So the last one to talk about, the last level of abstraction in this metaphor, is what happens when you bring all of the elements together, or you have a lack of elements, right? So when you combine them all together, you get spirit. And you have both spirit active and spirit passive. Spirit active is one side of the bridge, and it represents the combination of all the elements: life, gain, waxing energy, the full moon, deity, the fae, and Wiccans use it always. This is the spirit active is the purpose of bringing the elements into circle at the start of ritual. And you want to find unity between your physical self and deity, and that is why you bring the elements in and use them to bring alignment within yourself, and then alignment with deity, and then you can do spell work after that if you want to send energy back out. Spirit passive is used by Wiccans seasonally. Spirit passive is death energy. It's the force of death, right? So spirit passive is like the other side of the other side of the peak, and it represents, death, loss, waning energy, the dark moon spirits. Like when you draw a star, you draw up to the peak and then you have to come back down, right? So if you don't come back down that peak, you don't finish drawing the star. So spirit passive is just like the space between spirit active. It's an absence of life. That's what death is, an absence of life. And life is an absence of death, and it just oscillates on forever. And then you have what is the opposite of that oscillation of between life and death? Well, nothing. Nothing is the opposite of that, right? Something either is alive or it is dead, or it does not exist. And that is what we call disorder. And when disorder manifests into existence, we call that chaos. So Wiccans never use that. I am a Wiccan who uses that because I am an Open Minded Wiccan who does work to... Mostly my work with demons involves exorcising them out of spaces, but I do work with chaos. A lot of Wiccans don't even work with chaos even a little bit, and they avoid it as much as they can, and they just work with life energy, and that's fine too. Spirit is the bridge, okay? It unites the elements, spirit active with spirit passive, and through spirit passive to the higher realms, to divinity, and that is the bridge that allows us to transcend in our awareness, and that's the metaphor. Now, this metaphor can be used for any purpose. One such purpose is the derivation of the flat wheel. That is the astrology diagram that puts the zodiac signs in the house that they rule. So this is, you got Aries in the first, you've got Taurus in the second, you've got Gemini in the third. Okay, so in this first quadrant, you've got the fire of earth, because each quadrant is ruled by a different element. So whichever one is in the middle rules the quadrant. So for quadrant 1, it's Taurus, so that's the earth quadrant. In house 5, you've got Leo, so that's the fire quadrant. In house 8, you have Scorpio and Ophiuchus, so that's the water quadrant. And in house 11, you have Aquarius, and see just a little bit. So that is the, and so now you can use which part of the quadrant a sign is in to determine what the energy of that sign is. If it's in the first slot of a quadrant, it's the waxing energy. It's got cardinality waxing. If it's in the middle slot, it's got fixed energy. And what else matches this? The moon, right? Think of the moon cycle. Waxing energy means growing, gaining, okay, feeling energized. The waning means losing energy. Being philosophical, thinking about wisdom, aging. So you have each of those qualities as it applies to the element. So for Earth, you have Aries, which is the fire of Earth. It's lava. And it builds under the earth until it explodes. And that is the energy of Aries. Then you have the fixed earth. So that would be Taurus, the earth of earth. Rocks, crystals, stubborn things that are hard to change, that you can only change by wearing away at them over time, that will always be there for you, and that will take care of you and shelter you no matter what. Then you have Gemini, the air of earth, which is tornadoes, dust storms. So people who are Geminis are chaotic beings that are very abstract and philosophical, and every so often they just mow through your life and wreck a bunch of stuff, and then maybe they don't always stick around to help you rebuild it. But they're there the next time you need a shake up. So you can go around this whole circle that way. And you get Cancer, the water of fire. So that's tea. That's, something that you stew, right, in warm water. That's the essence of Cancer. Healing and protective. You've got fixed fire, right? The fire of fire, that's Leo, right? So fire, plain and simple. Energy, enthusiasm, gathering around fires, right? So you got Virgo next, the mutable earth. That's the earth of fire. So ashes, coals, things that can be used to start a new fire at any time, right? So once you have a lot of knowledge, it's easy for you to have passion. So then you go to the next card, you have cardinal air, right? So the cardinal air, that would be Libra, fog, okay, water vapor, not necessarily knowing if what they're saying is true or not, but at the same time, it's good for your skin. It feels good. It's a good ambiance. It's a good environment to have a negotiation, right? So it goes all around like this. Scorpio is the rapids. Ophiuchus is the chaos of fresh water, restless creation. Then you have, so even the signs that are not on the zodiac, they still pull from the same thing because the model was built around people's observation of what people are like at different times and how the planets influence them. Like thousands of years of just looking at this and studying it gave rise to the elements and astrology and all of these things simultaneously from the minds of the kinds of people who like to connect dots and see patterns and things. So that's why you get these systems that are totally compatible, that are really, really good metaphors. These are good metaphors, okay? If this was a theory in science, it would be a good theory. So why can't it be a good metaphor? So that is an example of how you can use this metaphor to derive the properties of things that exist in physical reality, which is how these things came to be. Now, when you're making use of these things in ritual, usually you're going to be summoning the elements to raise your circle to be outside of time and space, and you do that with the summoning pentagrams. Some people find it hard to remember this, but it is a really good, it really is not that hard to remember if you think of the diagram. And you're like, okay, water and air are opposites. So if I'm invoking air, oh, that means that I'm subtracting water. right? In order to have a concentration of hair, you take the water out of it. So in order to get concentrations of these energy, you just think of how they all connect. And that's why you draw the pentagrams. To summon fire, you start going in the fire direction. To summon earth, you start at the top and go in the earth direction. A lack of spirit gives you earth, right? So it's a way of thinking about it that, allows you to understand exactly what energy and be very specific with what energy you're bringing into the space without having to necessarily stand there and say 1,000 words that describe specifically what that energy is, right? That's why we use symbols and gestures and motions and metaphors so that we can do all this work without having to precisely talk about and use rigorous language to define everything every time we want to open our mouths. So that's what the summoning pentagrams are. Just another part of the metaphor. You should copy this down. You should start using them when you cast circle and practice them. Not every time, but from time to time. Not everyone will use the spirit pentagram. Some people will use it when they cut a doorway. When you cast circle, you don't usually walk through it. So we'll come back to that. If you're cutting a doorway, you'll do the pentagram. Many people will look at it like there's 3 circles because it's just like a conventional way to look at it. It's very traditional. If you go read some of Gardner's like High Magic's Aid, you'll see that he talks a lot about the 3 levels of circle. So some people will draw it 3 times. I draw it 3 times. I just draw each element once because it doesn't have to break the circle to bring an element in. But it does break a circle if you bring a human in. So I do 3 spirit pentagrams to open a doorway, and then I close it with 3 more. But it's just a formal way to denote the opening of a gate. That's all. It's just a metaphor. Which way you face, by the way, you face north to draw earth, east for air, south is fire, and west is water. If you associate these cardinal directions with different elements, then you should use different summoning pentagrams as well. So if you're summoning water in the east, because you live on, like where I live, and you just think that makes more sense geographically. So there was a long time where I did that when I was an eclectic solitary witch. Then you would draw the water pentagram for the east. So however you associate it. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about polarity in practice in witchcraft. Remember that from before, polarity is meant to establish what someone excels at. It's not describing their limitations. When someone says, I have a feminine polarity, they're not saying, I suck at battle magic. They're saying, I tend to opt for healing and protection and receptivity to what people are putting out there so that I can transform it into something positive. That's feminine. Okay, that's a feminine polarity. That doesn't mean that they're not a masculine man. If they are a man, doesn't mean that they have, that doesn't mean anything. It just describes their divine presence in this reality. It defines how they most readily act due to the transcendent nature of their energy that comes to form them. So masculine and feminine, when we're talking about polarity, are really about the divine persona. They're not about a person's ego, their body, or their identity, or any of the nature of their physical existence. And masculine and feminine are like the elements within each other. Just like how in that astrology chart, we saw that Aries was the fire of earth. So the energy of Aries is what happens when fire is a part of earth. Okay, so just like that, masculine and feminine are within each other. They're both one and they're dual. And everyone has both, but some will gravitate towards some things over others. And what types of things, specifically we're talking about magical practices, tools, crystals, herbs, the way you conduct yourself, your moral sense, the way that you do rituals or plan rituals, when you do them, which rituals are the most important ones for you personally. All of this will be influenced by your associations, right? So just like we associate herbs with fire, earth, water, whatever, so that we can understand them better and make use of them more readily in our practices, we do the same with ourselves. So I am, fire wind, right? So I am a fiery, windy witch. Okay, I'm the wind, Ogun's the fire. Both of us are very fire windy though. and that's our element, right? Like, so I'm air, that's my element. And I also have spirit as an element, which happens a lot to people who are mediums, people that work with the dead often and naturally work with the dead from a younger age, often will have spirit as one of their elements. It's less common. Most people have one of the four cardinal directions, one of those, but one of the elements. But yeah, I mean, it just depends. Everyone's different. So for me, it's air and spirit. For Ogun, it's fire and water. And everyone has something like that. And notice that my polarity is masculine, right? So I work with primarily male deities, and I'm a very masculine person. I stroke my non-existent beard when I'm thinking. I'm a very masculine person. I'm in a very feminine body, so it's not obvious to people that don't know me probably, and that's why people are often taken aback when they're like, oh my gosh, you're so bossy. And it's like, no, I'm just masculine, okay? I'm feminine in my physical body, but I'm masculine on the inside, like in my transcendent self. So so that's why for me, like, I associate with air. Air is a masculine element. So everyone's different. How you associate, you're going to have to think about that and figure that out, and that's part of the assignment that goes along with this week. So that's why I'm giving you some of my experiences to get you thinking. A good example of how we use polarity when we're looking at herbs is something like cinnamon. Okay, cinnamon is a masculine herb. It aligns with the god. And it brings vitality and a kick in the butt sensation. Okay, so if you were to put that into a healing spell, then you're going to give someone some pep, some vitality, get them fighting whatever it is that's ailing them, get them in the mindset of a warrior who's fighting these invaders inside their body. That's how cinnamon functions in food, right? So you put it in pie in the time of year where people are often getting sick, right? You're eating a lot of cinnamon because it's good for your immune system, it's good for your mind, it's good for your soul. It's soul food. It's good for your soul. And your soul is what's ultimately going to keep you alive more than anything else. So just like we use medicines, why not use herbs too? So eat the cinnamon in the fall when you're prone to getting sick, right? That's how witches think. Now, if you go to put that cinnamon, however, in like a relationship spell, because you're like, oh, it associates with fire, attraction, you may find out that an otherwise healthy relationship goes awry, or that people fight even more, and it just like gives people that the push they need to finally say what's on their mind, and they say it in the worst way possible because they have this kick in the butt impulse. And suddenly they're fighting, and the relationship spell is totally failed, right? So cinnamon, not so good for love magic, even though it aligns with fire, because it's too masculine. It just doesn't really. It's more about taking action, and when you love someone, you often need to be patient and slow down and listen before you act, right? So audacity can get in the way. So cinnamon is audacious. Let's put it that way. So if you know the polarity of cinnamon, then even if it associates with fire and you see it on a list of fiery herbs and you're like, oh yeah, fire, love, you'll know, okay, you know what? Cinnamon often can curse people, actually, and is not really a love herb. I'm not going to throw that one in there, even though it aligns with fire. So you have to know the underlying methods that go behind knowing what associations are which, in order for you to, right? You might think, oh, cinnamon is a good healing herb. It keeps you safe. It helps your immune system, but it helps it through a mechanism that doesn't work in a healing spell, like for relationships or mediation or receptivity. So you have to know that. Okay. Last here, we're going to talk about casting circle. Casting circle. Trace the circle thrice about to keep the evil spirits out, so they say. And you trace the circle thrice by doing each time around slightly different things. So it's called circumambulating. So you circumambulate, that means you go around the outside of the circle, circumnavigate, whatever. And you bring with you the first time water and salt, and that represents earth and water. And that cleanses the space, because those are the receptive, healing, those are the feminine herbs, so they cleanse, right? Women organize, women cleanse, women come in and say, what are you doing? Everything you're doing is stupid. We're going to do it better now. Okay, constructive destruction, right? This is feminine polarity. So you use the feminine polarity to cleanse the space. Then you use the masculine polarity, the fire and the incense, fire and air, to consecrate the space, because now you're putting will into the space. And that will is, this is a sacred space. Only sacred things shall happen in this space. That is a will. That is a manifestation of desire. So you cleanse the space with feminine polarity. You consecrate the space with male polarity, and with all energy present, the masculine and the feminine, which boil down into the elements. So having both of those present in Wicca means all the elements are present. Then you can send the energy out. Usually you send it out through the tip of an athame or by pointing a finger or your hand, and you draw the circle with a blade of some kind. Usually could be a crystal wand. Crystals, it could just come from yourself. You could, instead of circumambulating, you could just stand in one space and point with the blade. You can also push your energy out using bubble or chakra casting and not do this whole process. It just depends on how it's easier to get everyone visualizing the same sacred circle together when you take more steps to cast that circle. So for group rituals, it's highly advised you trace the circle thrice about. For personal rituals, you may just bubble cast a circle out. It just depends on how you're feeling and what kind of ritual you're doing and what kind of person you are, really. So when you go to cast a circle, you go deicil. That is clockwise. You always move towards the east. You always move to mimic the sun, the path of the sun. In the northern hemisphere. So Widdershins is said to banish. That may be the opposite in the southern hemisphere. I'm not sure. I've never been there. You tell me. But deicil is waxing and Widdershins is considered waning, and which way you prefer to go is up to you, depending on how you do magic. Now, the sacred circle is a hard shield. There are 4 different kinds of shields. We will talk about that in a future lecture. It allows nothing to come in and nothing to go out. Okay? So you cast it, and you're in your own space, sacred space. You call in the elements, and it elevates you to be above space and time, and you are just safe and protected in your own little space, where you can do magic and call on divinity and have visions and do whatever it is you need to do. It's your sacred space. It's your home, your head space, your soul space, whatever you want to call it. And circles are seen to be foundational, right? Because they're continuous, they're not dented, they're not cracked. It's very difficult to break them open. So spherical circles that have a domed top are usually what you might visualize if you're raising energy so that you can send it out in a burst. And cylindrical circles that go all the way infinitely up into the heavens, those are more common when you're bringing energy down into your space, and you want it to feel like, you're like a lightning rod. You're pulling the energy down into your space. So that's why you might use a different type of circle. And why do we burst the energy out? Well, think about it like a star, right? So a star that is not that massive sits there trickling away energy until eventually it's out of fuel and it just goes dark. It's just a brown star, dead star. Oh, it's so sad. And then you have stars that are larger that build the energy out until they run out of fuel, and then they're so massive, everything gets sucked in really fast, and that causes it to go boom, explosion out into space. We can't see the dying stars from the other side of the universe, but we can see the ones that explode. So why do we keep the energy in and then burst it out? Because things that go out in a burst are more concentrated, and that's how we want our spell work to be effective. So we concentrate the energy and then burst it out. And when you burst out the energy in a spell, it takes the shield down with it. All the energy goes out, and then some people will replace the shield after, and some people will just say that the circle is really sort of done. The ritual is kind of done when the circle breaks, but then you just wrap it up and spend time in your space, and then wrap it up doing something that mirrors, calling it, just for symmetry's sake. Now, when will you make use of a circle? You will make use of a circle when you are working with any energy that is not your own. You are generating energy to send it out. You are enchanting an object or designing sigils that resemble energy. When you do that, you will often find yourself exhausted by that process if you don't do it within a circle. And anytime you do divination, meditation, or astral travel, you will want to ask yourself, do I need a circle? Am I calling upon energy that's not my own? Do I do divination by working with ancestors? Then and death energy? Then maybe I should use a circle. Am I astral traveling when I'm asleep? You should use a circle or like a sigil that can function in the same capacity when you're unconscious. Am I doing some kind of meditation and I'm easily distracted by what's going on around me or noises in the outside? Or then cast a circle. Cast a circle, put your energy out, push all of that stuff away, and then try meditating. It'll be way easier and more effective and beneficial. So there are many times you will want to use a circle. The times that you really need to use a circle are when you're doing burst magic, you're gathering the energy up and sending it out fast. You're doing binding of any kind. You have to keep the energy that you bring to you from other people out of your own space. We'll talk about that when we talk about evocation coming up. And ritual to make sure that you're protected. You're not invoking energy that you don't understand or that you didn't intend to. And you're not going to be distracted by what's going on in the outside world in some way that is detrimental to your health. Then you use a circle for sure. When you are doing circle with multiple people, a lot of people will say that the circle will break if someone walks through it. A lot of people will say because it just breaks the illusion, right? The illusion of there being a wall there. You were depending on that illusion to keep you safe, right? It's a delusion that you willfully accept because it helps you keep other energy and distractions out. So if someone just walks through it, well, does that weaken the illusion? Probably. For most people it would. So that's why you stop them and you cut the door. And you use the spirit pentagrams oftentimes. Bring them in and then draw the door frame back up and zip it up, right? Like you're camping, like it's a tent. Keeps the bugs out right now, keeps the energy out. That same concept exactly. Everything within a sacred circle should be sacred, should be consecrated. So we'll talk about how to do consecrations in a future lecture coming up. The next one, then we're going to spend some time just gathering tools, and we're going to dedicate and gather tools and make our tools and learn about us, and then we will come back to a lot of this subject of doing spells. So for now, it's just an introduction to get you started, to make sure you're safe. And that's why we're spending so much time on shielding and getting you to cast shielding before you do anything else. Even your attire should, in theory, be not stuff you wear all the time. It should be sacred. I will consecrate my clothes many times because I don't have a lot of clothes that I like. So I do sometimes wear some clothes that I might wear in ritual out. I have some clothes that are nicer that I only wear to like nicer events. And I am the kind of person that feels like my life is a ritual. So I'm just like in a sacred space all the time. But some people will have clothes that they only wear for ritual, or robes or something. Some people will use visualization and imagine themselves putting clothes on before they start ritual, especially like rings or jewelry or crowns are common. A lot of people will have crowns that have the High Priestess symbol on it. I'm allergic to metal, so I can't wear anything fancy or pretty. I have some cords that we all get cords in our lineage when you initiate. But so attire is usually consecrated and considered sacred. Everything in the circle has to be sacred. Everything in the circle has to be ordered. All of it is there deliberately. The energy of all of the things present, you understand well, and you want it to be present. And that has to be the case, lest some energy come in that you don't want, lest you get distracted, and something take away from your purpose, your spiritual, your religious ceremony, and you wind up, it doesn't serve you, it hurts you or something, and you wind up worse for wear. You wind up exhausted at the best case, and at the worst case, who knows? So we'll talk about that. It's not fun to talk about that. This lecture's fun. We're having fun. Yay, magic. Yay, shielding. Okay, so this week is a lot of questions. Well, actually, it's 2 weeks. Next week is Mother's Day on Sunday, so you don't have class. But it's a lot of questions. It's a lot of reading. Our next lecture is just going to be on astrology because it's going to take a whole hour to just go over it. And I'll give you the flat wheel and I'll get you started so that you can understand planetary transitions and what might be significant for you in particular. And I'll show you how to use a tool called Stellarium. I have a whole course on astrology that I also will link to, but we're going to cover it just from a high level overview, just what you need to know to like be a witch. And then that's going to be short and light, and it doesn't have a lot of homework associated with it, just a few questions, and drawing your own natal chart you should be able to do after the next one. So that's why there's so many questions this time, and so it's a lot, but you've got like a whole month to really do all of this. Just keep that in mind. Get started on these exercises. You're going to keep doing these exercises even through the next one. And then we'll do dedications. So on June 3rd, in our Covenant of the Open Mind full moon ceremony on the Open Minded Crossroads, we will do dedications live with anyone who wants to dedicate into a coven, our coven specifically. But if you want to just do a dedication into Wicca and not into our lineage, that you can also join us for that. And or do your own. It's a good moon for it. And then we'll get through the rest of the course and be ready to do initiations closer to Samhain. So if you're joining us live, now is the time. Practice your shielding. Let's get you guys dedicated into witchcraft so you can feel like real witches and do real magic and be empowered beings. Blessed be. So thank you for joining me. And from all of us here at the Covenant of the Open Mind, blessed be.